Retro.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Hello, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are resuming our The Clone Wars rewatch series with this episode. But before we find out what Ahsoka, Anakin, and Obi-Wan are up to, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Sure can. We are on Facebook and Instagram very conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal is boosted to maximum output. The shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are about to begin a discussion of perhaps one of the most legendary trilogy of episodes in all of the Clone Wars with the Mortis arc here. And before I even have you read the summary, I just got to know, Jay, what do you think of this 3-episode arc, and what's your relationship been to it over the years?
Well, I was always fascinated by it from the very, very beginning. And I know that at the get-go, this kind of polarized some fans. Some loved it, some not so much, some absolutely hated it. But for me, I just thought that this was really getting into not just some of the mythos of the Force, but also really cool foreshadowing and just so much building upon what the Force could be, what it is, how it's manipulated through the ways that people see it, I guess you could say. And so I just always loved it. And yeah, so I was so excited, of course, to revisit this again. And it's become, like you said, so legendary among fans and among just the storytelling and just the entire web of what Star Wars is.
Yeah. So I was among those when these episodes came out originally that was not a big fan of it.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why. It's like the Force is mysterious as it is. And for all the fascinating things that these 3 episodes do, they raised a whole bunch of questions that never like didn't answer any of them over the course of the trilogy. That's not entirely fair to say. Over time, the more I've seen this trilogy of episodes and the more I've discussed it, I've come to appreciate it more and more. And I also think it benefits, the rewatch of it benefits from subsequent content that's come out in Star Wars that's kind of highlighted some things that, looking back, I think was, new content was inspired by this and helps give us a bit more clues as to what was going on. It's important because I know these 3 episodes were pitched by George Lucas. This is something that he really wanted done in the Clone Wars to kind of flesh out what was going on with this idea of the Chosen One and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to look at them and think about them. But they are challenging to discuss, because I don't know that there are a lot of clear answers as to what all of this means when it's said and done. And we can't, and we're not even going to try to cover everything in this discussion of just the first episode, because we got 2 more to come, and we'll likely be covering those back to back next week. So as we kind of work with our April schedule to accommodate some stuff. But that being said, we've shared some of our thoughts, been a little bit vague. I'm assuming everyone has seen this, but go ahead and give the summary, if you would, as a reminder to everybody what this episode is about.
Absolutely. And one other thing really quickly too, before I read the summary, is that, and I wanted to add this in there, is that this, when I remember when I first saw it, kind of gave me the same sorts of feelings as some of the content in the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars that we got to see. So there was that callback as well. So I just had to throw that in there. Okay, so the summary, here we go. When Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka are sent to investigate a distress call from beyond the Outer Rim, they find themselves on a mysterious, distant planet strong in the Force that they cannot pinpoint. That planet cycles through the seasons on a daily basis, and it is there that they meet three beings also powerful in the Force: a father, son, and daughter. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka each experience visions before the father reveals to Anakin that he believes him to be the chosen one meant to replace him and keep his children in line, who, if left unchecked, could rip the galaxy apart.
Yeah, so no small thing there here. And
Yeah.
this entire episode ends with the father saying, if you leave, then nothing but sadness is going to follow you. And so, and Anakin's kind of torn about this here. I wrote out notes here, and I had an idea of how I wanted to start this discussion when I was doing so, but now I'm not so sure that that's how I want to do it here. So I will point out a few things that happened. Over the course of this episode, we get some Star Wars luminaries returning here. Most notably, Liam Neeson comes back to reprise his role as Qui-Gon. And then Pernilla August comes back as Shmi Skywalker. Now, they're both visions in that regard. This is Sam Witwer's debut in the Clone Wars. Prior to this, he performed Starkiller in the Force Unleashed video games, but he's the voice of the son. And then Adrienne Wilkinson is the voice of the daughter, and she had played Maris Brood back in the Force Unleashed as well. So all these guest stars have Star Wars experience. So Liam Neeson, really big get, fun bit in the featurette where Dave Filoni talks about how that came to be, which I absolutely loved. But one of the first things that happens is this distress signal coming from out beyond the Outer Rim is over 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
My memory is that they never explain anything about that distress signal, what the origin of it is or whatever. It's just kind of the MacGuffin to get them where they are. But what's your memory of that?
Well, like you said, with it being 2,000 years old, the first thing you see is sort of Yoda's ears literally perking up as if to say, "Oh, wow," kind of thing. I've been around for a long time, but
Older
this
than me it
distress,
is.
yes, older than me it is, exactly. And so that obviously sets us up for the fact that whatever this is coming from or wherever this is coming from is older than pretty much any recollection or history that any of these Jedi has possibly ever been in contact with.
Yeah. Here's the other thing about it is, like, how did the father, because he's the one that ends up sending this, he's one of our three Mortis Gods, as they're come to be known. He sends this signal because he had to find out about the Chosen One. He'd heard that the Chosen One had emerged, and he had to see it for himself. So he sends this signal. How did he know that Anakin was going to be the one that was going to be sent to investigate this?
Right, and I put that in my notes as well, that he said he had news that had reached him. How in the heck did he get this news? Was this something
Yeah.
that the Force was just literally putting out there as a signal? I thought to myself, could Sidious have had any hand in this perhaps, kind of thing? But then I thought to myself, well, that doesn't make any sense because he wanted him for himself.
Right. So let's talk about these Mortis Gods for a second here. So there's three of them. There's the father, the son, and the daughter. And over the course of the episode, we find out that they are so powerful that the father decided that they kind of had to be removed from the galaxy because their powers could be problematic. And the father is what keeps the son and the daughter in line, but he's dying, so he's looking for a replacement, which he believes to be Anakin because he is the chosen one. And for everything that we say, the father's essentially telling us that his view of the prophecy of the chosen one, the one who shall bring balance to the Force, is that this chosen one is supposed to keep the son and the daughter in line. Okay, I bring that up because this is one of the things I've always struggled with, is like, who exactly are these people? Are they people? Are they supposed to be manifestations of both sides of the Force, with the Father being like the overall encompassing Force? He says that they are not like Jedi, they're not Sith, he being the Father, but they are Force wielders. And he says that they are anchorites. They withdrew because of their powers. When Anakin meets the Son, or actually it was when Obi-Wan and Ahsoka met the Son, they asked if he's a Sith, and his response is yes and no in
Mhm.
that regard. The daughter doesn't really say much about who they are, at least not in this episode. What's going on here? What's your take on these three?
Okay. So I actually have quite a bit, and some of this is more me talking through my, I guess you could say, speculations about what I think they could be. And I think that that's part of why they are presented the way that they are, is to keep us talking, and
Mhm.
that there is no clear cut explanation. But first of all, Mortis obviously operates on a very different set of laws or truths than what
Mhm.
we have as logic in the physical realm, if you will, of the galaxy. So it has its own kind of force logic, not physical logic. So the truth is almost as if, what Obi-Wan would say from a certain point of view, kind of thing. So the way that I always looked at the father, son, and daughter is that they are not the force itself. A lot of times people say, well, the son is the dark side, the daughter is the light side. But what really, like you said, the father is there to keep them from being torn, ripping the galaxy apart. To me, the father is balance, and so that is why he was seeking out Anakin, is because he had heard through his news, as we just said, that Anakin was the chosen one to bring balance to the Force. So for him, it makes sense. Okay, balance is dying. I need to get someone in here that is going to replace that balance. But the thing of it is that these are not people. I don't think they're embodiments of how the Force behaves when personified. So it's almost like if facets of the Force had personalities. Okay. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. So, could they be ancient Force wielders who kind of transcended mortality and became these archetypes? Like you said, these anchorites? Sure. I think that that's absolutely possible.
Yeah, it's just so unclear to me because and I picked out the lines that I did when I was setting up that question for you for specific reasons. One, the anchorite term. I didn't know what that meant until I looked it up today. And it is people that typically withdraw from society to focus on their spirituality. In Christian type religions, it is, the relationship with God and that type of thing. And so he's suggesting that they've withdrawn from society. Now he points out it's because his kids are so powerful and they couldn't be left unchecked in the galaxy. So they're doing this, to focus on the relationship with the Force and so that they don't rip the galaxy apart. But it suggests that they themselves are not some embodiment of the Force. But yet, you look at the son's answer, which is when he's asked if he's Sith, his response is yes and no.
Hmm.
And they are obviously portrayed, the son and the daughter, as being, kind of like yin and yang. And all right, they've got to be kept in balance, as you were pointing out. One's the light, one's the dark. And okay, but you brought up the whole thing of personification, which I agree with. And especially when the son says it, he's not a Sith, but he is that personification of the dark side that the Sith are relying on there.
Right. Right.
So again, I don't think there's a clear answer. To me, I think they are intended to be beings there, but maybe. And here's the thing: it's like with the Ahsoka series when they get to Peridia, which appears to have something to do with these people. You know,
Hmm.
it's like, well, where do they actually come from? And backing it up another step to that. Well, actually, no, I'm going to say that when we actually talk about this place that they're at, because wow, there's so much. It's so deep, but it's just really hard to pin down what's going on here. It seems like, you know, I'm thinking also of things like the a High Republic. We had the world at the end of that, Planet X, and Avar and Elzar had to stay behind and keep the light and dark in balance there so that the galaxy did not crumble. And I'm hoping that the Project Luminous crew, and Pablo Hidalgo, when they set all this up, that this was something they were looking back on as an inspiration, because it feels like it had to be inspired to this by some degree, a vergence of the Force. And I apologize for my rambling here, but it's hard to get all these thoughts out.
Mhm.
Here it is. I mean, you've got these two beings, they got to be kept in check. They got to be kept in balance here. And we won't get into what actually happens to them by the end of this trilogy of episodes, but I should probably stop calling that. It's a 3-story arc. But yeah, they cannot get off the planet. They cannot be allowed to run amok in the galaxy here. I get that it seems to me that they are very aligned with the two sides of the Force without being the Force themselves, I think, is the conclusion that I've come down to.
Mhm. No, and I think you make such good points with all of those things. And, first of all, I want to address what you said about the son, is when he says, am I Sith? Yes and no. And I think you're absolutely right. He is desire, he is domination, he is all of the things that the dark side is, but which is what Sith are, but there is no code and there's no doctrine. So no, he's not Sith. So, he kind of exists somewhere in between on that, for sure. And that's what I'm saying with this, is that I think that that's the whole idea of the father dying, quote unquote, is that he's not able to bring balance at this point. And so that's where, again, when Qui-Gon even shows up and he says, have you done it? Have you trained the boy? Kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then all of these different Force conduits, as you said, and Mortis setting up all of these things. And you talked about Planet X, and, even things like, in The Last Jedi, when Luke even says, powerful light, powerful darkness. And that's what Rey is sensing. She's kind of sensing sort of the same sort of power. And, caves. We've looked at caves as being these Force nexus type things as well. So, this is the ultimate of that, because obviously it exists on a plane by itself. I mean, if we go back to the very beginning of the episode, Rex is talking to Anakin and they go to the same coordinates, but Rex isn't there and Anakin's ship's not there. So where in the heck are they? And even, Obi-Wan says, are we even still in our galaxy, kind of thing? And I think the
I'm
answer
not
to that is probably no.
right. He says, I can't even determine where in the galaxy we are, or if we're even in our own galaxy.
Yeah.
And okay, so that gets into the conversation of where are they? Because when they had that conversation with Rex, the next thing that happens is they see this giant, like, double
Event
pyramid,
horizon almost. Yeah.
thing that opens up, alien, Close Encounters of the Third Kind style, and then they fly in, and next
Mhm.
thing you know, they wake up and they're on a planet. They're not inside some sort of a ship, as best they can tell. And the day cycle there is the seasons change according to whatever time of day it is. And we see things like, in the morning they're fresh sprouts, and as the sun falls they die and wither away, and then the cycle repeats the next day. And of course, this all is it's bizarre, and both the daughter and the son have different views on things. The daughter is like, it's safe to be out here now, but we can't be out during nightfall. And the son advises them to take shelter because that's his domain, and like we see tons of lightning and things that are happening. But you alluded to Qui-Gon. He talks about how this place is a conduit for all of the Force. It all comes through here. And he also describes this place as a magnet and an amplifier.
Mhm.
Then you stack on top of this the finale of the Ahsoka series, where we essentially, it appears like we see the temple that the father is in, or the monastery, as Anakin calls it, in the distance. We see the statues of the father, the son, and the headless daughter there. And so, do you think there's any chance that they actually got transported to Peridia across the galaxy, into an entirely new galaxy, based on what Obi-Wan said, and Qui-Gon's statements, and what we see that's happening here on the planet, and the architecture? What's your thought?
Oh yeah, I think it's completely probable that that could have
Mhm.
happened, and I'll even take that a step further in to say that perhaps this building, this monastery or whatever you want to call it, is a ship that takes them from wherever they need to go to wherever they need to be.
Mhm.
So, there's that too that could potentially be. My feeling is, could that have actually been Qui-Gon that was talking to Obi-Wan? Because as we know, Qui-Gon was able to use the wills technique to, obviously become a force ghost, which Obi-Wan ends up doing later and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if it wasn't just a vision, that it was actually in Obi-Wan's case, actually Qui-Gon that was talking to him.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up because I have thoughts on this and they're going to be slightly wide ranging. And I'm going to try and keep it as succinct as possible. I believe it was Qui Gon. I believe it was Qui Gon's Force Ghost. And he was able to appear to Obi Wan in this moment because, well, he said, Obi Wan asked him, "How are you here?" And Qui Gon says, "It's because you're here." And
Mhm.
then Qui Gon explains that this place is a conduit for the Force for the entire universe. And so this place, and let's assume it's for Peridia for just a second, is some place of the Force is so strong that Qui-Gon can manifest because Obi-Wan is able to feel the Force, experience the Force in a way that he can't anywhere else. And two, this planet, as we were just talking about, goes through this cycle of seasons. It's the things are new and fresh, and then they die. Kind of reminds me of the way that Luke was talking about the Force in The Last Jedi. That there's this powerful light, powerful dark. And when Rey is reaching out to the Force, she sees the porgs and the hatchlings and stuff like that. And then later, when they're talking about the dark side, the eggs are smashed
Oh
by
yeah.
the waves. And then you see the plants grow up and die, wither
Mhm.
away, all at the same time of thing. I think it is that spinning of the cycle of life and death. They're keeping each other in check, light and dark here. Also, I am also wondering if, we don't see this on Peridia because, the son and the daughter are so tied to these sides of the force without being themselves that they are in fact what drive those seasonal changes on the planet. And when they're gone and Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine are later on Peridia, well, then there's no change like that because there's no one there to drive it anymore.
Mhm. Mhm. No, I think that makes total sense. And I had that written down myself, that the shifting seasons are really symbolic in that way,
Mhm.
because it just shows that balance is constantly shifting, that
Yep.
light and dark is always in motion and balance is not static, that it's a constant struggle. And
Right.
so I think that there is some, truth to what you're saying about then being on Peridia, and how that's so much different in the way that that balance is being shifted or balance is being maintained, as the case is.
Yeah. And one more thing before we get off this topic. When did Sabine finally make her breakthrough with her ability to use the Force? It was on Peridia.
Mhm.
And is that because it is this conduit that she finally was able to feel the Force maybe a little bit more? I suppose if you interpret that way, then it kind of lessens her character arc in Ahsoka. But anyways, it's just something that's out there that if this planet is such a conduit, which I think makes some of the visions possible, makes Qui-Gon's appearance to Obi-Wan possible. Maybe it is possible that Sabine can finally make that breakthrough and using the Force as well in
Mhm.
Ahsoka. So,
Yeah, and I don't think that that minimizes her character arc at all. I think it just adds another layer of explanation.
mhm, mhm. Okay, let's talk about the visions here. And I'm throwing Qui-Gon visiting Obi-Wan, even though you and I both agreed that he was actually there. But Qui-Gon shows up. Obi-Wan asks him how he's here, and then Qui-Gon's response is because you're here. And then he starts asking about Anakin. And have you trained him? And he's like, yes, I tried. And then Qui-Gon points out that there's beings here that believe he is the chosen one, just the same way that I do here. And because this place is both a magnet and amplifier, it's very dangerous for Anakin to be here. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this, I think, even further just solidifies the idea that Qui-Gon actually was there, because every other being on this planet or entity, as it were, is trying to get Anakin to stay.
Mhm.
And Qui-Gon is saying, "Mm-mm. This is very dangerous for him."
Yeah.
So I just think that that just kind of further, like I said, exemplifies that. And, it also lets Obi-Wan see the really what's at stake, I guess is the best way to put it when
Mhm.
it all comes down to it.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting to me about this is that the next time Obi-Wan sees Qui-Gon is on Tatooine, and it's because he's finally ready to do so here. So it's like,
Yeah.
I think this kind of further enhances our interpretation of this place is such a conduit that it's possible for Qui-Gon to show up in this moment, but not again until Obi-Wan's overcome those own internal issues that were interfering with his ability to use the Force in
Mhm.
the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. So,
Yeah.
all right, moving on. Anakin makes it to the sanctuary. He's confronted the father who tells him to stay the night. And while he's sleeping, he's visited by Shmi Skywalker. Again, I'm not so much sure that this one is a vision as it is the son messing with Anakin here,
Yes, I
because
agree.
at the end you see that gargoyle face, and but he's trying to convey a message. Shmi Skywalker shows up and basically says, I'm here, give me some of, release that guilt. Let me have some of that. He talks about how he regrets not being able to save her. He's struggling with the vengeful feelings that he's been feeling and slawing for the Tuscans. And, he can't give into the dark side because then it'll prevent him from loving Padme. But the vision of Shmi comes back and says that she's the poisoner in this. What do you make of that?
Well, like you said, I think that a lot of it is the son messing with Anakin, but it's also trying to get Anakin to face some really harsh truths about some of the choices that he's made. And even the fortune cookie at the very beginning, was all about guilt. So it
Right.
was, balance is found in the one who faces his guilt. And so Anakin he was kind of trying to face his guilt. At first he wasn't having it. He was like, "No, my mother is dead. You're not here." He was even struggling with the word dead. And and then all of a sudden he just starts opening up and he starts talking about what his failures were and everything. And like you said, you pointed out that that's when Shmi kind of changes form and becomes this gargoyle, which is kind of personifying what Anakin becomes, kind of this loss of identity sort of
Right.
thing. So I mean, there's some massive foreshadowing in that one for sure.
Yeah. And then the last one is Ahsoka is asleep in the cave, and she wakes up as she's presented with a vision of her older self. And the end result of that conversation is that the older Ahsoka says, "You got to leave Anakin if you're going to survive."
Mhm.
She points out that the seeds of the dark side have been planted in her by her master, which is like foreshadowing, not the seeds part, but she does end up leaving Anakin,
Mhm.
by the end of season 5 of the Clone Wars there. So is this one truly a vision, or is this maybe the sister or the daughter rather coming and presenting this to Ahsoka?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I just talked about massive foreshadowing, and as you said, this is obviously something that ends up happening to Ahsoka. One thing that I thought was interesting in the way that this was framed is that the seeds of the dark side have already been planted by your master.
Mhm.
In that, I don't really feel that in the things that Anakin has done as a master to Ahsoka has done that. Anakin's had his own issues. Anakin has acted in the way of the dark side, when he slaughtered the Tuscans and, he did some of these other things. But has he truly planted any seeds of dark side in Ahsoka? Maybe unintentionally, if you wanna go that route, but I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to say that, as you said, maybe the daughter was just trying to get her away from Anakin just in general. You know what I mean? Because she physically separated them at the beginning, and even though she said, "That was my brother," was it really? When the whole boulder thing fell down, or were they
Yeah.
trying to physically separate them?
Yeah, good question. Good question. If we had a lot more time, I think we would dive into that one.
Right? Yeah.
But we're revisiting a lot of these topics as we get through the next 2 episodes as well. Yeah, the seeds thing, it stuck out to me as well. I was like, well, what are those seeds? And I was trying to think of like instances where maybe Ahsoka demonstrated some behavior, and like the closest thing I could think of was when she threatened Gunray on that episode.
Mm-hmm.
Back when Asajj Ventress stormed the ship that Gunray was being on, that they were transporting back to the Republic to face justice, and Luminara had to pull him aside, like, Padawan, what are you doing? And so maybe a few things like that. But I think they Yoda put Ahsoka and Anakin together in the hopes that having that responsible for Anakin would like maybe temper him some. And then also you kind of get the idea that Ahsoka might have been a bit more of a free spirit than Yoda wanted as well. So you put them together, and then there's responsibilities imposed on Anakin that's going to mellow them both out. But
Mm-hmm.
along the way, I think maybe some other lessons, kind of like as Anakin would one point tell Ahsoka, it's like, it's all about how you disobey the
Right.
the orders that come in. That's important. So there's that, but we can pick up that topic another day. There's one more key scene that I think we really have to talk about, and that is when the father says that he's going to uh, test Anakin so they can see the truth of who he really is. And he has the son and the daughter basically take Anakin and Ahsoka, and they bring him there to the monastery, and they're in that big open atrium area. And the son has got Ahsoka, and the daughter's got Obi-Wan. And basically the father says, you can save, it's up to you to save them. You can only save which one, which you're going to do. And Anakin brings them both to heal. And what was really cool to me, and this is where you can see maybe some clues about what's going on in Rebels, when he does so, the floor turns into a star field, and you kind of get those outlines of the areas where people standing. And it kind of reminded me of the World Between Worlds when that happened.
Yes, for
But
sure.
so he did show that he is someone that's capable of balancing them both in that moment. But what are your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, here's the thing. I mean, Obi-Wan says to Anakin, the planet is the Force, use it.
Uh-huh.
So he was basically telling Anakin that at that moment, I know how powerful you are. I know you can do this. Even though he's sitting there saying, save Ahsoka, and Ahsoka says, save Obi-Wan. And so Anakin is literally being put in the middle of the two people that he cares about the most. I mean, he's got his master on one side, he's got his apprentice on the other side. And the
Second and third behind Padme.
yeah, right. True. But in this instance.
Yeah.
And so, but they're telling him you can only save both. And, Anakin's like, hold my beer, watch me, I can do it all. And he does. And he does that on what I think is so cool again is on Obi-Wan's suggestion, use it.
Right.
You can do this. Use it. And so truly this is Anakin embodying the balance of the Force, and that he can control both the light and the dark in such a cool way. Yeah, I love this scene. It's just
Yeah.
so cool. And it just shows how powerful he is. But I at the very end, there was that little additional on your knees
Mm-hmm.
that he commands the daughter and the son to do. Did he really need to do that? Probably not. That was a little extra, but, that was just him putting the exclamation point on the fact that I can control you both.
Right. A couple of other observations. One, I don't know if this was the intent, but when he says that, did you notice how his voice changed, and it kind of picked up that echoey effect that the Mortis Gods had in their voices?
Oh, yes, yes.
And so to me, it's like, coupling with what you just said about Obi-Wan telling Anakin the planet is the Force to use that, I think that is a big clue as to what happens here. It's like, as we were talking about earlier, they may not be the embodiment of the Force, but they're so aligned with the two sides of the Force that the Force really is speaking through them. They're almost inseparable from the Force as it is. And in that moment, Anakin was doing the same thing, except for he was taking both sides of the Force. It was the light to control the dark to control the light. And that's why we got this vision of the galaxy. It was everything there that he was calling on. And
Right.
so in a bit, he sounded a bit like the Father in that moment. And so we could see that, this is the truth, is what he is. He is the chosen one. He is this person that can bring balance to the Force there. But, it's... We're going to have to start wrapping this up because we still got another episode to record tonight. It's midnight for us. But but this is going to give us some more fuel for our discussion and the next two episodes that we cover of the Clone Wars here. And I'm glad we're covering these because, like, I said earlier, these are such legendary episodes of the Clone Wars, and they've sparked probably more conversation than anything from the perspective of what these episodes mean. Things like Ahsoka leaving the Order sparked plenty of conversation, but for a different reason. But any other final thoughts on this before we wrap up?
Well, there's a couple actually. Well, the last thing that the Father says to Anakin is that he can't make him stay, but if he leaves, his selfishness will haunt him and the galaxy. So I think that's kind of a double-edged statement in that, yeah, he wants him to stay to bring balance to the Force, but also his selfishness that is also what brings down everything in the Republic eventually.
Yeah.
So, and creates the havoc that is once he becomes Darth Vader. So, there's so much of a heavily laden statement right there. So there was that. And then I also did appreciate, we've always talked about very well-placed humor, and there was still some of that levity in this episode. When the daughter comes out of nowhere and missed opportunity, Obi-Wan did not say, hello there. He just said,
Right.
well, hello. And then when Ahsoka says to Anakin, don't trust him, Anakin says, you think? So, there was a couple instances of that too, which I appreciated.
Right. The other one that's to me is if the daughter says something like, when they ask where they're going, she's like, to my father, of course. And Ahsoka's like, oh, of course.
No, of course. Yeah.
Well, no duh. Why didn't we think of that? But yeah. All right.
Exactly.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have more time to talk about this one, but we'll definitely be talking about the themes as we cover the next two episodes of the Clone Wars in the next week. So make sure you all come back for that, especially if you enjoyed this episode. We hope you did. It was. I'm glad we got to talk about this, Jay. It's been a long time coming, but they're such important episodes of the Clone Wars that it was their time. I'm glad we finally got to it. But yeah, so thank you all for joining us. And if you haven't done so already, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to the podcast, rate and review, do those type of things. It really helps us out, helps out our numbers and the algorithm and getting the show in front of more people. If you want to find more episodes of the podcast and what we think of previous episodes of the Clone Wars, then one of the best places you can do that is retrozap.com. It'll have the entire catalog of the shows there beyond the 200 episodes that you're likely to have on your podcatcher of choice. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else they can find us online?
Absolutely. So you can always find us on our Instagram and Facebook at Podcast Stardust. And we also have all of our wonderful Pinterest boards that you can check out for all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And then we have our two YouTube outlets, including the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And we're also on things such as Spotify and Audible as well. And you can also email us, podcaststardust@gmail.com, if you'd like to leave us your thoughts on this episode or any others. And you can also do that on any of our social media presences that I had listed. And then if you are in need of some new Podcast Stardust swag, you can head over to the link in our show notes, and that will take you over to our TeePublic store. And we have 7 different show logos available to choose from on all kinds of fun stuff, from t-shirts and sweatshirt to athletic gear, coffee mugs, and just a bunch of fun things. So check that out at the link in our show notes.
All right. What do you got going on in cosplay?
Well, speaking of Ahsoka, you can always catch me on my Instagram as Ahsoka at j.snipscosplay. And I recently went to Fan Expo Cleveland, had a lot of fun. So you can check out some of my recaps there. And I've also got some things in the works for later on this spring. And I'll be talking about those as those dates start to get a little closer.
All right. Upcoming on the show on Wednesday is the next installment of our Darth Bane book club. We'll be covering chapters 7 through 9 of Path of Destruction. And then on Friday, we'll wrap up the week with another look at some Star Wars news. So with that, thanks for listening to episode 1014 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.